recording. So you're going to use the material from the reading, the first 3 chapters of Learning Web Design, as your content. So you don't have to write anything or make up anything, but you can just use it as a sort of a guide. And that's your content. And then you're going to make that one web page. So here is some examples here. If I open that, and it's kind of small, but you can zoom in here. So here's what it would look like generally. So it's just a summary kind of some points from the chapters. There's chapter 1, chapter 2, etc. That's what it looks like in the browser. And then this is what the code looks like. You don't have to print anything, obviously, but that's just the code. And you do have to use a few pieces of code. And I'm just basically, for this first one, I'm not going to really look at design. I mean, I'll look at it, but I'm not going to grade you on design or anything. Basically, what I'm going to look at on this first sort of independent assignment is, did you do the assignment? Did you do a web page with some information from the first 3 chapters? And was the code valid? So I'll run the validator and make sure that it's valid. And then I'm going to look for these 5 things. So this is just things that you have to include. So you have to include a heading. We've already done that. Block quote, you've already done that. Yep, I think you've done strong, but you will before this. You have to add a background color, which you will see how to do in the videos. And then you have to do a list. So a list is like this, a list of items, a bulleted list or a numbered list, some kind of list. So I'm just going to basically check off if you did these. That's it. So that's not due next week. That is due in, I think, 2 weeks. So sometimes you'll have these weekly ones, right, where you do the follow along thing. And then you'll have a few of these where you're not following along. You're kind of creating it on your own. So that, I think, is due in 2 weeks. But as usual, just check the calendar for that. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about that assignment? No? Everybody's good? Okay. Okay, so let's go back up here. So I wanted to finish up this terms file. I know it's a little bit boring, but some stuff you need to know. So we're back on that terms file. I think we mentioned this, but just some definitions. HTML is hypertext markup language. That's what you write your web pages in. You guys have already done it. So that's the HTML, the tags and things like that. It's basically the structure of the document. People call it the structural layer. So that's what that is. Yeah, HTML. And then cascading style sheets, we've done a tiny bit of that, and you'll be doing more and more of that. So what the cascading style sheets is the people call it the presentational layer. That's how the page looks: colors, fonts, background images, layout, all that stuff, how things look. So the idea is that the HTML is the structure and basically the content, and the CSS is how it's presented. And the reason those are kind of separate now, they used to be before we had CSS, it was all in the HTML. You had things like bold tags and italics tags. Now you don't want to use tags that have a certain look. What I mean by that is you want to use what's called semantic markup, which might be in here somewhere, but semantic markup means use tags that make sense for the content. And you're not supposed to put in the HTML like how things look if you can. The reason for that is because if you separate how things look from the actual content and structure, then you can make it look different ways in different locations, for example. So you could print it and have it look different than if it's on the web or whatever. Or it could look different all different reasons. Maybe you're on a tablet or something like that. So that's the idea behind separating those HTML and CSS. JavaScript is the programming or scripting language usually used on the front end, or what people see. That people call it the behavioral layer. You can do all kinds of things with JavaScript. We don't really do any JavaScript in this class, but in the next class it's introduced, and then there's a full JavaScript class. It's a full-blown kind of, it's more scripting programming. So those are the three things that if you're going to be a front-end developer, I think we mentioned, meaning you're going to code the front end, you're going to code what the user sees in the browser, then those are the three things you have to know is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, basically. As a designer, you don't really have to know all those, maybe, depending on where you're working and how you're working. But it's good to know at least some of them because, again, like, even if you're a designer, if you know what the developer has to do, that helps both of you guys. So, yeah, so those are those three. URL, you've probably seen this before, or also called URI now. It's basically the address for something on the web. And why is this, or in the web? Why are we talking about this? Because this structure for this thing will affect how you guys make your websites when we start doing multiple page websites. So the first part here is called the protocol. That's the means of communication. So HTTP means hypertext transfer protocol. That's for a web page. You've all seen that. Well, maybe you don't see it. Now the browser kind of hides this, but sometimes you see it. Then you've got this part, which is called the domain. I'm going to zoom out because that's making me look weird here. Zoom in this way. Then you've got the domain, which is basically the name of the site. Yeah, kind of a named. So you got apple.com, whatever, usatoday.com. That's called the domain. And then you're going to maybe see a slash and then another word, and that's a directory or a folder. And then you might see another slash, and then you'll see another directory or folder. And then eventually you end up with the actual file that you're looking at. So here's an HTML file, right? Or sometimes they have HTML extensions, but usually HTML. It's both the same thing. So what this is kind of an address, right? You've got like the website, and then you've got a folder inside the website, and then you've got the actual file. So that's important because that's how you're going to do your own links when you start doing links between your pages. It won't be very complicated for yours because your sites are not going to have 500 pages, I don't think. Maybe, but I doubt it. But that's important to know how that works. And we're going to talk about that you'll see that in the links video and stuff like that. This part, the domain, is just a word or name, right? So you can buy a domain. Does anybody have a domain? You can raise your hand if anybody have one? Oh, okay, yeah. So once you buy a domain, you don't really have anything, right? You just kind of reserved a word or a phrase or whatever. So if you're going to actually put a website up, you have to have a domain, and then you have to have somewhere to host your files. So that's usually a web host. You can literally host your own website if you want. Not many people do it. It means you got to like have a computer on all the time and have a fast connection and things like that. Usually you're going to have a web host. So if you're going to have a website, of your own, you need a web host and a domain name usually. I guess technically you don't have to have a domain name, but usually you are. And we're going to talk about that later too in the semester. So a domain is a group of computers on a network functioning as a unit, like apple.com, for example. Obviously, there's not one computer web server somewhere with all of Apple's website on it. It's just too much data and too much traffic for that to be one computer. So they're administered as a unit, and that's the domain too. There's this thing called the DNS system, domain name system. That is sort of the phone book for the internet. So that keeps track of the domain name, which might be apple.com, and then it directs it towards an IP address or an internet protocol address. And then maybe sometimes you've seen this. Anybody ever seen this? Like you go into a website and you see these weird numbers. That's an IP address. It's basically an address for a device on a network. So that might look like that. You could I don't know, well, yeah, it depends. You could maybe type this in and get to an actual website depending on the security and stuff. So that's called an IP address, that number there. The rest I'm gonna skip a little bit here, but I'm gonna skip through some of these. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That allows transfer of web pages via browser. So when you go to a web page, you're actually looking at something that starts with HTTP, right? Like I said, some browsers will hide that from you now, but you could still type it in. Usually you don't even have to type it in anymore. But then there's HTTPS. So when you're on a secure connection to a website, it's HTTPS. It's a different protocol, and a protocol is the rules for communication. I kind of skipped that one, but so if you're doing an e-commerce type site or banking site or something like that, you obviously want to have more secure communications between the server and the client or the browser. So that's HTTPS. FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. And the reason I'm telling you that is because we're going to do this later in the semester. So if you want to put your website on a web host, oftentimes you're going to use an FTP program, and it's just an app. Just an app that takes your files and you transfer them from your computer where you work to your web server, wherever that is. Often that's using FTP. So, and then sometimes you might see, if you're downloading files from somewhere, you might see FTP in the URL, meaning you're connected to an FTP server, not a web server. Different protocol, different way to communicate. Okay, I think this is the last one of these annoying acronym things. TCP/IP stands for Transmission Control Protocol Internet Protocol. What does that mean? IP is responsible for moving packets between nodes. TCP is responsible for verifying delivery from client to server. Man, that is nerdy stuff. Okay, so what's a packet? Anybody know what a packet is? Like on a network? It's like a little piece of your file. Yeah. So if you send I'm using my hands here, you guys can see it, right? If you send an image file, it doesn't send the whole thing as one piece usually. It usually breaks it up into little pieces. Those are called packets. Part of that is to make it redundant, and it basically sends a little piece, sends a packet. The server says, "Did you get the packet okay?" And the client, which is your browser, says, "Yeah, I got it. Send the next one," and kind of like that. So it cuts it up into pieces to make it more redundant, and so you're not breaking files all the time. That's part of the reason. It's part of that Cold War kind of redundancy thing. So that's a packet, and then nodes is communication points. I think we talked about that last week. And then the TCP part, the transmission control protocol, verifies delivery. That's again that communication thing. So the client and server are talking to each other. The server is where your files are. The client is your computer at home, or sometimes people refer to the client or the browser as being the client. So that's probably enough about that, but it's good that you have heard these at least, so you have an idea what's going on. I think we can skip most of this. I did want to emphasize that what the browser does, right? So we've looked at this already, but if I look at a web page, right, that's what the browser is showing me, but this is the actual code. So the browser interprets HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and all that. This is what actually gets sent from the server. Just a bunch of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So that all gets sent from the server. The browser gets that and makes this. So it interprets and presents the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So these are the same file if you want to think of it that way. And you guys have already seen that in your first two assignments, right? Or first two assignments. You have this HTML file, which is this bunch of code, and then you look at it and it looks like that. If you look at it in browser, if you look at it in text editor, it looks like that, right? So same thing, but that's important to remember that the browser is just kind of reading that file and presenting it to the client. All right, I think that is good. Oh, wait, one more. The W3C, I don't know if I mentioned that. Maybe I did. W3C. That's called the World Wide Web Consortium, which sounds like an evil plot or something. Maybe it is. But these are the people that decide what is the standards, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all kinds of other things. They work on the coding part of it, I guess. Not the code. Well, kind of like Adobe would be for Photoshop. The W3C is for the web and things like that. So they are a group of software engineers, designers, everybody. There's lots of different people involved. So if you want to look up what officially is the rules for HTML or CSS or anything like that, it's the W3C. So that's where we got that, the validator, right? It's a W3 validator that they're doing that. They're validating the code when you submit your file to the W3C validator. So that's the standards organization for the web. So yeah, I think that is it. We kind of went through all this stuff last week, most of it anyway. So any extra comments or questions about that? You guys can check that out if you want later, that file. Remember, it's in week 1. Not super exciting, but it is things that you kind of at least have to know something about. But okay, so let's take a quick look at a video from, this is from LinkedIn Learning, which used to be lynda.com, which is a really good resource for stuff that we do. Software stuff. It used to be basically like software tutorials, but they have a lot of other things now. It is a subscription-based thing. I don't make you guys get it or anything. I think it's like $25 or more a month, something like that. But I just thought we'd take a quick look at a little bit of this video on UX, if it works. Yeah, here we go.
Remembering things and doing stuff. First, let's discuss some built-in limitations.
You know what? Let me make sure my share is on correctly here. So you can hear better. I don't think my audio was on right last time.
With how people's brains work. Once you know these, you can work around them. In this chapter, we'll talk about how bad people's memory is, how poor we are at multitasking, and how easily distracted we are. It's actually amazing that humans manage to function at all. The reason we can is that we've developed coping mechanisms. If you include those coping mechanisms in your product, you'll help users complete their tasks. If you make users think, they'll find it painful to work with your product. Those coping mechanisms include things like carrying information between screens or applications rather than making users remember it, letting users choose from a list or display rather than remembering a command or name, introducing new concepts during lean-back pauses, presenting answers rather than making users do sums, helping memory and navigation by telling a story in the user's language. It boils down to this. People are really bad at remembering things and at doing sums. On the other hand, computers are really good at, you guessed it, remembering things and doing sums. So if you take every opportunity to remember customers' information and present them with results rather than with work to do, they'll thank you for it. The rest of the videos in this chapter go into more detail about the various coping mechanisms so that you can really understand them and apply them in your work.
Can you guys hear that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
I think we'll do one more and then we'll talk about it just a little bit. So jot down a couple notes about what he's talking about and then we'll talk about it.
It's useful to think of our memory as two separate types of storage, short-term and long-term. Long-term memory is where our brains store the information we use in our lives. Stuff only makes it into our long-term memory if we use it frequently or rehearse it enough. Short-term memory is where we hold the information we're using right now. A phone number we're about to dial, the name of someone we were just introduced to, a street address we need to get to, and so on. It takes conscious effort to keep remembering that stuff in short-term memory. If we get distracted and stop repeating it to ourselves, we forget it after about 20 seconds. This has some implications for how we design software too. As you can imagine, if someone's busy trying to keep some information in their short-term memory, it makes it hard for them to focus on the interface. So it's important to make sure users don't have to remember stuff between screens or applications. For example, it would be bad if they had to remember the item number from a product screen so that they could type it in to a checkout screen. Now, of course, there are some specialist sites that let you do this as a way to order multiple items at the same time, but that's a power user feature and not something you'd expect to see as the default. Another example of remembering stuff between screens is when visited hyperlinks don't look any different from unvisited ones. That forces users to remember where they've been because they can't rely on color changes or other graphical indications to see which links they've already clicked on. One key way that you can help users is by not making them remember stuff at all. Recognition is much easier than recall. If we see a set of items, we can more easily choose from that list than if we had to remember all the items without any prompts. One of the biggest examples of this is GUI interfaces like Windows and Mac OS versus command line interfaces like Unix and DOS. In the command line interfaces, you have to recall the commands you want to use. That means you have to store them all in your memory. In the graphical interface, the various commands and available items are shown on the screen as menus or as images for you to pick from. Even bringing information back from long-term memory has a mental cost. It means we can't devote so much processing power to other tasks. It takes effort for visitors to your site to try and remember what path to take to get to the things they want. We just mentioned making it so users don't have to remember where they've been. It's also important to make it so they don't have to remember where they should go. Make the available paths through the UI clear. Group similar items so people can find the right general area, and use familiar layouts so that people don't have to remember the special way that your site or app behaves that's different to everyone else's. We just talked about showing people their options to pick from, using recognition rather than recall. That often leads to another discussion about how many menu items we can have before the list gets too long and confusing. There's a design myth around this called the 7 ± 2 rule. It has its roots in memory research, and somehow it got associated with menu list lengths. The background to this is some research from the 1950s by George Miller at Princeton, which shows that we can store about 7 chunks of data in short-term memory. He suggested that some people can store more and some people can store less. That's why we get the ±2 part. What happened is that somewhere along the way, maybe because menu items are a little bit like chunks of information, people started saying that menus should not have more than 7 ±2 items in them. I have to say, that's a bogus rule. Menus can be much longer if they use grouping and separators. What you'll notice, though, is that the list of options within any one area of the menu is probably less than 7 ±2 items long. Mega menus even use headers to split out the available options, and seeing them all in one place can really help. Again, even with all these options in one place, most mega menus tend to create sections that seldom contain more than 7 ±2 items. Even though it has no real background in memory research, it turns out that the 7 ±2 rule does work as a general concept for basic list-style menus, where each option is part of a group of similar items. Just don't get carried away and try applying this concept to every menu in every interface you ever create.
All right, so let me actually stop that share so I can see you guys. So some things that came up, he talked about you don't want to make the user think too much, right? There's a book, I think I mentioned it the first day. It's called Don't Make Me Think. It's by Steve Krug. It's about usability, making websites usable. And if you think about websites, apps, you could say the same thing about apps. So the more you make a user think, the harder it becomes for them to interact with the material or the content. So you don't want to have them have to remember things as well. That could be a sort of cognitive load. People talk about cognitive load. How hard is it to interact with things? Another way to think about that is an interface, which means you're sort of looking at data, right? You're looking at information when you're looking at an interface, a website, an app, or whatever. If you see the interface, if you have to think about the interface, that's bad. What I mean by that is if you kind of see what's going on and you have to figure out how something works before you actually use it, then that's a problem. Because now they're not interacting with your content, they're trying to figure out how your interface works. Does that make sense a little bit? So yeah, try to avoid that. He talked about sensory overload and memory, the 7 plus or minus 2 thing. So it is true that that's kind of bogus as far as like people can't remember more than 7 things. There's some interesting research about like, I guess, gamer society, gamer kids, whatever. How many of you guys play first person shooters? Yeah. So a few people do, right? Or you admit it anyway. At least some people admit it, right? So there was some research done where people that don't really play these kinds of games, they can keep track of 5, 7 things spatially, like in 3D space. Just normally, that's kind of what there's 2, 3 people over there, and there's 4 people over there, that kind of thing, right? I think some research found out that people who play first-person shooters, which are games where there's people everywhere, right? They can track more things in 3D space. Like they know there's 6 guys over there, there's 1 under there, there's 3 over there, there's 4 back over here this way, there's 7 over this way. And so they actually kind of rewire a little bit. So people can learn to do things that it's not like, it's a rule, like, nope, nobody's going to remember any more than 9 things. It's not going to happen. So that's kind of what he was talking about a little bit. Let me share my screen a little bit. Yeah, you got a question, Galen?
Actually, sorry to interrupt, but I was just kind of interested in like UX conventions, particularly when it comes to like websites. Something that may be more obvious, but I'll ask is, do conventions really change that much over time? Like, I know UX is a really booming field, but as for I can see like maybe for like apps or tools, you would need like a UX designer to figure out best practices. But in terms of just your ordinary website, there are already kind of like conventions that everyone's already used to, right? So do they really change that much? Is a UX designer specifically very effective in that regard? Or
so you're saying, do things change?
yeah, like your nav is always at the top.
Yeah.
etc.
I think they do over time, right? I think we mentioned the hamburger menu thing, right? That was a change, and it took a while for people to figure it out. Probably some people still don't know what it is, right? Depending on the sophistication of your user. But I think things do change. And you can just look at, especially on mobile and touch interfaces, right? There's a lot of interactions now that, and you'll have onboarding too on apps and websites. Onboarding is where you're like, the first time you use an app, you've probably seen this, right? Everybody's seen it. You get an app, and before you use it, it says like, if you want to see how to do this, click up here. If you want to see, how to get to the next screen, swipe to the right or swipe to the left, whatever. That's onboarding. And that's because interfaces have gotten maybe a little less, there's a term called discoverability too, where people don't intuitively know how it works. And that is something that you have to watch out for. So conventions help with that, right? Because if you use a convention, people are like, oh yeah, I click up here and I do this, right? But if you're doing things that are different, then it can be a problem. Facebook gets a lot of flack because people get used to the interface and then they change it. They make changes all the time, right? They iterate. It's called iteration, changing a little bit. And then people get mad because they're like, why'd you change this? Now I don't know how to use it anymore, right? So anytime you do change or move away from a convention, even one that you established, it does cause a little bit of friction. That makes sense, kind of?
Definitely, yeah. Thanks for explaining.
So he showed that mega menu from Amazon. This is a classic. I think you guys can see this, right? This is Craigslist, which probably most of you guys have seen. And it's kind of a funny, so this is a site that's been basically the same design for 20 years. I don't know, something like that. And it's a really successful site and it's popular. And there are literally like, I bet you there's hundreds of designers that have talked to them and been like, can I please redesign your site, right? This is horrible. It's just like this blue list of links and it's so boring and there's no pictures and blah, 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 blah. And they never do it because even though it's not attractive, right? And it's not modern looking, it still is pretty efficient in some ways. Basically what this is a big list of links, right? And this breaks that 7 ± 2 rule pretty thoroughly, right? There's tons of things here. But what also happens too when you have sites like this is if you use them a lot, is anybody on Craigslist a lot? Or, you know, something like that. You kind of learn where things are, right? There's sites like this for plumbing supplies, right? If a plumber has to go on a site and order a plumbing fitting every day, 3 times a day, he knows that site pretty well, and he can get, or she, right? I'm being sexist. He or she can click on pretty fast about, you know, I need this, you know, hose or whatever. So it can be pretty efficient. And another thing about this is, since there's so many links here, this is kind of a flat UX or a flat information hierarchy, meaning I can get to pretty specific things with 1 click. There used to be a rule called the 3-click rule, which was not really around anymore, but the 3-click rule basically said you don't want to have people have to click more than 3 times to get to something. That doesn't really make sense, really, because you could have a site that has 4 pages and that would be stupid, right? But if you had a site that had 10,000 pages, it might be hard to get something in 3 clicks. But the general idea makes sense, that you want to minimize, you know, how many clicks you need, a user needs to get through. Just kind of minimize it. That's kind of what we're doing today and Wednesday is talking about information architecture. And that's what he was talking about a little bit as far as grouping items together, right? So here you've got jobs, you got housing, you got community. So even though there's I don't know, 50, 100 links on here, because they're grouped together, that helps a little bit. You get a little bit of a mind map about where things are. So a lot of information architecture, which is basically the design of or the organization of the content and the information, is about that, kind of making, grouping things together in a way that's logical for the user. You guys in the UX class have done this all the time, probably. Any other things that he said? Let's see. Oh, it's easier to recognize things than to come up with things, right? So a multiple choice quiz is easier than one where you have to come up with a short answer. It's easier to recognize what's right as opposed to, you know, draw it up from memory. So think about that when you're doing your interface stuff too. Websites, apps, whatever. He talked a little bit about user feedback, like making links look different if you've been there already, so the user doesn't have to remember that kind of stuff. Sort of a related analogy that I like to mention is, like, think of when you're in an interface for a website or an app, you don't want to notice the interface. Like I said, you don't want to say like, oh, how does this work? If the user's thinking that at all, you've kind of messed up a little bit. So think about, sort of related, I guess. You ever watch a movie or a video and you see the microphone come into the shot? Anybody ever see that? So it kind of ruins what's called suspension of disbelief. It kind of ruins it, like, I'm not in the story anymore. Now I know that this is a process and I'm just watching some people on a stage or whatever with a microphone. Sort of like similar to interface design. If you see the interface, if you notice it, then that's not good, because it takes you out of the content, right? It's distracting. Okay, that's probably enough on that. Let's see. So I wanted to quickly hit on some of this web design process. You guys can take a look at this on your own, but I wanted to look at it together anyway for a minute. And we talked about this more in the 46 class too, but also in the UX class, you'll see this stuff too, but you kind of have to know what's going on here. So this talks about 2 basic methods for web design, sort of the process, right? One's called the waterfall process. It's basically a process where things go in order. So it's you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. It's kind of a linear process. So the steps in that can be, they're mentioned different ways, but they're often kind of similar. You're going to do a research and discovery phase where you're going to find out about the target audience. You're going to research the industry that you're working in. What are the goals for the project? What's the scope? Scope means how big is it, right? How much is there to this project? Is it 100 pages? Is it 5 pages? That kind of stuff. Budget, you might figure out, talk about existing content, scheduling, all kinds of things, UX stuff like card sorting, which we'll kind of do a little bit today, and all kinds of other tasks. So this is basically figuring out what you want to do before you do it, and then researching the users and the company that you're doing the website for, assuming it's a company, or it could be a group or whatever. So that's what you're doing first is kind of a discovery phase. People call it discovery. Then you have sort of a strategy or planning stage, where you might do written stuff like a creative brief. You might do the information architecture, which we're going to look at in a minute. Make a site map. That's a map of all the different pages in the site. Talk about how the navigation works. Talk about user flows. How do people go through the website or the product? What journeys do they take? There's things called user journeys and user scenarios. All these are kind of related things where you're basically talking about how is the user going to interact with this website or app or whatever it is. You might do things like wireframing. So you guys are going to do wireframing a little later, but wireframes, I think I mentioned already, are kind of blueprints for pages. And they can be higher fidelity or low fidelity, more detail or less detail. There's a bunch of apps here. We don't have to go into that to do wireframing. Then you're actually doing design. So we're already in the third stage here, right? We started out with research and discovery, and then we went to strategy and planning, and now we're starting to design. So we haven't actually started design for a long time. And that's part of the idea too, is right? Planning ahead will save you a lot of trouble and make your website more effective. So designing can be wireframing in this stage too, developing the look and feel or the design, creating a style guide, which is sort of a document that talks about colors and fonts, design patterns, stuff like that, modules, components. I know I'm going faster here, but wanted to get you guys a little feet wet on this a little bit. You might do comps or mock-ups. Usually those are done in something like Photoshop or Sketch. You guys will have the opportunity to do that later in the semester. You don't have to do these, not in this class anyway, but often that's part of the deal. That may be your main thing to do, actually, if you're a web designer or visual designer for a web company is working in Photoshop or Sketch and making these mock-ups. And then you might do prototypes. Prototypes are basically functioning mock-ups or comps, meaning they are pictures, usually, of web pages or apps, and you kind of wire them up so that you can click on them and go to different screens and things like that. So we're going to do that too. You guys are going to do that in this app called Envision. And it's actually pretty easy, that part of it. So that's prototyping. And then last, you're going to do develop and production, where you're basically actually making the files, making the images, making the HTML pages, the JavaScript and all that, hooking up a database. That means if it has to talk to information on a server somewhere, like an e-commerce site, that would be something you do in that stage. Actually, you'd be working on that ahead all the time. But so basically making the pages, making the site. So you don't actually make the, construct the actual thing until the end, pretty much. So part of the lesson from that is do your pre-work, know what you're going to do, what your goals are, who you're making the site for, that kind of stuff before you actually make anything. So that's called the waterfall process. It's kind of long and laborious and linear, meaning where you're doing this and then this and then this. You compare that to the agile process, which is kind of more chaotic. So the agile process is less structured. It's an iterative process. So when you hear people talk about iterating, they're basically making something and then they're tweaking it and then they're making it again and then they're tweaking it and then they're making it again. A lot of software now is done that way. And website, well, probably more software than websites, more apps and software. Websites can work that way, and they are made that way, but it's kind of more of an app thing. So that's kind of Facebook their motto used to be, they used to have it on the wall, was move fast and break things. I think move fast. Yeah, move fast and break things, which basically means make it, right? Make this app, make this feature, make this whatever, this new thing for Facebook, and then we'll see if it works. And then they'll test it, right? And if it doesn't work, they'll get rid of it or they'll change it. So it is kind of chaotic a little bit, but it's kind of like the waterfall process, but over and over again. You make something, you look at it, see if it's working, get some feedback on it, then you go back and you revise it again. So that's iterative, right? You're revising. So that is a different process. It's more flexible. It's faster, can be faster, a little more chaotic, but there are advantages to it. It may involve things like sprints where a new version is developed. Then it's evaluated again and you make another sprint and you do a design sprint and blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of stuff that you'll be talking about in the 70 class as well. But I just wanted to show you guys that real fast because, yeah, it's good to know. We're kind of doing, I will have you guys do mostly more waterfall type process a little bit, where you'll do some drawings and then you'll do wireframes and then you'll make pages, kind of traditional. It's easier to sort of explain and work in probably, but it's not like you have to do it that way all the time, or you will do it. There's a bunch of articles here as well about comparing different processes. And this stuff is evolving all the time too, right? This has only been around for a couple of years. So there's a bunch of articles you could check out here and different takes on the web design process. So that's all linked. I know that was really fast too, but that's all linked from this link here. You can take a look at that. And like I said, we do that more in the 46th class. There's a video about it as well. Information architecture. So this is the last thing we're going to do here today, is talk about information architecture, which is basically how do you organize information. So I got a couple of links here as well. This is from the Nielsen group, which is user experience, UX, kind of the holy group, like a very well-known research group in user experience. There you go. And it talks about the difference between information architecture and navigation. So we know what navigation is, right? That's the links on your page, if it's a page. Information architecture is basically the organization of the information. Little bit what he was talking about in the video. So you need to have your information well organized, especially if it's a bigger site, right? If it's a small site, it's not that big a deal. I mean, it's still a big deal, but especially on large sites, you have to have an organized information, or the user can't figure out where anything is. How many of you guys have been on a website where you just can't find it without using search, right? So people search now, but you're just kind of clicking, and you're like, I can't find what I'm looking for, right? That happens. So that's information architecture. You need to have some sort of organization for your site to make it make sense to the user, and then it's logical, right? It has to be logically organized. So this talks about information architecture, and then how to, and then it compares it to navigation. So navigation is sort of the manifestation, or how the information architecture gets surfaced, or how do you find things, right? Linking to the actual information. Here's an information architecture thing I did a long time ago for a website. It was for a therapist. And then I kind of took, basically you take like a map of all the information you want to put in your product, website, app, whatever. So I've got fees, there's fees here, resources, self-help videos, links to the location, contact info, how therapy can help, some articles and things, biography of the therapist, things about life transitions, divorce and anxiety and things like that. So basically taking all the information that you want to put in an app or on a website and somehow organizing it, right? So that's information architecture. And then it becomes this kind of mind map or information map informs how your website's going to be literally constructed, and the navigation and all that. Somebody had a question or something?
I was trying to give an example. Trying to find your list of digital book rentals on Amazon can be a real pain. It's hard to find.
Yeah. I couldn't hear you very well, but I think you said something was hard to find, right? Like, yeah. So what I want to do the last little bit here is just do a quick example. And so I'm gonna have you guys do this together again on Wednesday. A little more involvement from you guys. But this is an app called, or sort of a web app called draw.io. Or maybe it's got a different name now, but it does these files called draw.io. And they're schematics and diagrams. You can do all kinds of things. There's all kinds of different versions or starting files. If I went to new here, I could do business charts, engineering charts, flow charts, different kinds of maps, network mapping, mind mapping, software, all kinds of stuff. But basically, I started with a blank file here, and this is all web browser based. So you can make sort of an information architecture map or a site map, sort of related, and save it and kind of use it to plan things, plan sites, whatever. So I've got this box here, and I have this scratch pad that I already have used. These are just things that I've already made, and then kind of you can save them to a scratch pad and reuse them. But I can also just go in this general area here, if you guys can see that, and drag things out. So if I want a box, I just drag out a box. And then I can double click in it and I can type in it. And if I want to link two boxes as if they're linked on a web page, I can kind of go like that. And then they stay connected, and I can use this to sort of brainstorm and plan. You can do this all kinds of different ways. You can do this on Post-it notes. People do it with Post-it notes. They do it by 3x5 cards. They do it in software like this. There's lots of different ways. You could even just make an outline in Word, like a text outline of your content. But these are all different ways to just organize your content. So what I'd like to do right now, just for the end here, is to kind of do a quick sort of sitemaps / information architecture for a website about a movie. So so I got I'm gonna say this is the main page here. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. What's a movie that we could do a website for?
Tenet.
What was that?
Tenet.
Oh, Tenet, the new movie, okay. I don't know anything about it, but I mean, I know it's a new movie that's come out. So I'm gonna say that, so this is my homepage or whatever. So I'm kind of being vague a little bit on what's the difference between information architecture and a sitemap. Information architecture is literally the information in the site. It may not conform exactly to pages in the site. So that's more of a sitemap. So they're related. Some people might say they're the same thing. Some people say they probably say they wouldn't. They're not. We will kind of do information architecture. We'll just do sort of a map of the information, more information architecture on this. So let me go back here. Oh, I lost it. Got too many screens open. Here we go. Okay. So what's a piece of content that we would want to put on a website for this movie? I'm just going to drag out new things.
Just like
you know what? You guys
production
can
credits.
actually. Why don't we do this a little bit so it's maybe a little more efficient? Maybe it'll work better. Is you guys can put it in the chat too. Let me open the chat window. Where's my chat? Oh, there it is. Okay. Trailer. Okay. Yeah. So the trailer would definitely be something. And then that might go more in general. We could say, like, I'm going to throw in some too. Oop, that's a small one. Let's do this one. Clips, right? And then the clips, yeah. So clips, and I'm just going to we're just to throw stuff out. Somebody said age group. Does that mean, Tony, what do you mean by that?
Like if it's PG-13 or rated R.
Oh, yeah. What is that called?
A rating, I think.
The ratings. Okay.
Ratings.
That's usually just a tag, right? But yeah, we could put that. And then somebody said hero shots. You mean film stills? Like
Yeah.
images?
Yeah, something like that. Impressive shots.
Yeah. I'm going to say stills. Stills are shots from the movie that they're stilled, right? Price. Well, do we know the price? A movie's prices? I don't know if we know that one. But, you know, it depends where you go.
Cast.
What was that?
Cast.
Oh, the cast. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay.
Synopsis.
Yep. I'm going to say story. Same thing, basic, right? What else? Where to watch? Oh, dates. Somebody said dates. That's good. Release date. I mean, that's kind of, it's information. It's probably not a whole page for that. And we're kind of just throwing out information architecture. So that would be okay then. Instead of, you know, you wouldn't make a whole page for the release date probably, but, or maybe you would now because of the way things are released. Behind the scenes. Yeah, that's good. Behind the scenes. Critics. Critic reception. Reviews. Is that reviews, sort of? Yeah. Yeah. Location of the movie. Do you mean, Chi, did you mean the location where it was shot or where it's showing? Oh, where it's shot. Okay. Okay. We could say it. We could do that. Locations. Genre. Yeah. That might kind of be in the self-explanatory in the story, but sure. We'll say genre. What else? Throw out a few more here.
Photos.
Photos. Yeah, do we have, oh, we have stills, but
Okay.
there could be other photo. Behind the scenes is kind of photos too. So let's just say photos, or maybe gallery, huh? Gallery could have, yeah. Ticket options, buy tickets. Sometimes you can buy tickets on websites, right? So that reminds me, so buy tickets, you can, a lot of movies, not all movies, I don't know about this one, they're gonna have what, merchandise, right? Maybe. I don't know if this one does, but definitely if it's a, you know, Marvel movie or something. Soundtrack, yeah, there you go. Soundtrack. Anything else? Running time. Sure.
Link to IMDb.
Link to IMDb. So that be, that's not reviews. Okay, let's just
Okay.
IMDb. Okay. That's probably pretty good. So let's, so like I said, you could do this on 3x5 cards. You could do it on Post-it notes. People do it. And then this is card sorting, basically having, now we take all this information and put it into categories that would make sense for the user, right? Not necessarily for us, so that they can figure out what would be where, right? So I'm gonna put this up at the top. That's the home page, right? And then I'm gonna say, what are the main categories of stuff? Probably gallery, right? So we'll say gallery, and that could be photos, could be named something else, but I think we get the idea. And underneath that is gonna be stills, and is behind the scenes gonna be there too? Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
So we'll go like that, and you can just move, it kind of locks in, you can move things around, And you can also clean it up later, but clips. So that could be a category maybe, right?
Yeah.
And then you're gonna have a trailer there. And then I would say we need something like other clips. Or maybe there's behind the scenes there too. I don't know. Sometimes there's other clips besides the trailer. What else? What's a major category here? Probably the story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go story. And then cast maybe. And what's cool is you can drag this, you know, there's no size to this. You can make it as big as you want. So I'm gonna say cast, and I don't know who's in this. Give me one person who's in it.
John David.
I'm just gonna say John, just to save time here a little bit. So yeah, you can put the cast members under here, and then let's say I'm just gonna put second casts, so we can save a little time here. And then what you can do is you can take these, and now these little circles, if you guys can see it, I can take these and I can, oops, grab here, there we go. And then I grab that and I go like that, and they're connected. Grab that and go like that, and these are connected. And then you can move them and they will still stay connected like that. So that kind of shows the connections. Now, yeah, these can be different styles. They could be arrows, they could be lines, whatever. But basically it shows that these two pages are connected. If I do this, oh, keep doing it wrong, there we go. That means those two pages are directly connected. It might mean that on a sitemap. We're kind of doing a combination of sitemap and information architecture, but if you see lines, basically that means that they're probably connected. And you could do like all that too. So I could go that way, I could go this way. One thing we forgot, I think maybe you would add would be crew. So do we want, if we want the crew, like the director, right? Do we want to put cast and crew, or do we want to put a separate thing for crew?
Probably combined.
Combined. Okay, so that's a decision we make, right? So that this process helps us figure that out. So instead of saying cast, we'll say cast and crew. And then I'll take this down here, and then I'll do another one, maybe, and I'll put director. And that there's more, you know, well-known people that we want to emphasize, that kind of thing. Like that. So you guys kind of get the idea of that a little bit. So this is something you would do in sort of the discovery or strategy stages, where you would take your content and you would make a content inventory, basically a list of stuff that you're going to put on your site, and then you somehow organize it so that it makes sense, right? What I skipped was, because I wanted to show you guys after, is if I was going to do a site about a movie, one of the first things I would do would be go look at a site for a movie, right? Any movie, if I've never done one, right? And then I would say like, what's on that site? So we've got tickets, watch trailer. I think we had that, synopsis, official site. Maybe that wasn't the official site. Oh, no, this is the official site. So tickets, watch trailer, gallery, we had all that stuff, right? And then down at the bottom, it's got soundtrack. We had that. Let's see, is there anything else? Let's go to gallery. Yeah, it's just basically a gallery with photoshopped images. Yeah. So, but I would look at I would look at some websites for other movies and then use that as sort of a model, right? You don't have to start from scratch out of your brain. You probably don't want to when you're doing this kind of stuff. So you want to look at other similar sites. If I'm doing a website for a plumber, I would look at other plumber websites and say like, what's on the plumber website? Oh yeah, I should use that. I should have that. I don't need that. Does that make sense too? So you definitely want to do your research ahead of time, both in the genre of the website that you're doing, the sort of topic, and then what you might put on that site. So hopefully that makes sense a little bit. I think, yeah, we're already over time a little bit. So I'll save this, and then I'm going to have you guys kind of do a similar thing and do a little better, a little more refined on Wednesday together. So that'll be one of the things we do on Wednesday. For your sites, until you get to like the final project in this class, this is more a little bit theoretical, right? Because you're not going to have a giant site with 50 pages or 100 pages. Probably some people do, but not very often. But this sort of whole idea of just making sure that your information is organized, even down to the page level, is important, because that is how people experience your page, is through the content and how it's organized, right? If it's just chaos and things are in random places, even a one-page site, right? If things are in random places, then it's not going to be very effective communication-wise, if that makes sense. Yeah. All right, I think I'm going to end there for now, and we'll continue on with this on Wednesday. Do you guys have any questions or comments about this process before Wednesday?
Hey,
Yeah.
hey, Mr. Garrett. This diagram app is still new to me. Can we learn more about it someday?
Yeah. You can definitely play with it. That might be something to do before Wednesday. You just go to draw.io, unless they changed it, but that's how I got to it. If I just type in draw.io, I guess now it's called diagrams.net. But either way, it will get you there. And then it does say, the first time you go, it'll say, where do you want to save the file? And, but I already picked my device, so it says device here. But it will say, oh yeah, it'll do this. It'll say you can save it to a Google Drive, you can save it to OneDrive, you can save it to your device, which means your hard drive. You can save it to Dropbox, GitHub, or GitLab. I usually do device. And then what's good about this, it's basically free. I don't even know if they have a paid version, but when I've done with this, I can go to File and Save, and since I picked device, it saves the file to my computer. There it is on my computer, and it's a draw.draw.io, but basically it's a text file that is using XML, actually, kind of like HTML. So when I go back, I could open it again. I can upload it or open from device right here. So I could go open from device and find it there and open it. And I have the file, and it's all free. So, and you can do all kinds of different stuff. There's actually one of the presets from, if I go to new, and maps, I think it's under, there's this map in here which actually looks a lot like, let me get this out of the way here. Looks a lot like a kind of a nicely designed sitemap. That's what sitemaps typically look like. If I look up sitemap in Google, they look like this. A lot of them are going to look something like that, right? Nicer than what I just did, but just cleaned up. Here's a super simple one. So it has the pages and then links between them. Yeah, those are sitemaps. But there's one, like I said, there's one in there that kind of looks like this one here. But you don't have to use that one. We're doing this again on Wednesday, so don't worry about it. But I definitely would play with this before then, and you'll see how it works. It's pretty easy. You just drag things out, double click in them to type in them. you can move them around, obviously, and drag more out. If you have a style of box that you like, you just drag it over to Scratchpad, and then it'll be in there as kind of a starting template for an item or an object. Cool. All right. So, all right. Well, thanks. And I think.
Of course, it's amazing, Mr. Garrett.
Oh well, yeah. It's cool. It's cool that it's free. Yeah. So I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Take a look at some of that stuff, and I think a lot of you guys have already turned in assignment 2, so I'll be looking at that. And then I don't know if you noticed, but I posted a week. You probably did. I posted week 3 yesterday. So I'll typically post the next week on Saturday or Sunday, Monday at the latest, but probably Sunday-ish for the next week. So you can see what's going on. And then remember, you can check the Canvas calendar to see when things are due. So that assignment 4 is not due next Monday. You have 2 weeks, I think, on that. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks. I'll see you guys later.
Wait, Mr. Garrett, I have a
Bye,
question.
Mr. Garrett.
Bye.
Sama.
Thank
I had
you.
a question.
And I'll hang around if anybody has a question.
Yeah, for sure. Is assignment 2 due tonight, or is it due 12, like in the afternoon?
Assignment 2, yeah, it's like 11:59 or something like that.
Tonight, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, for sure.
Technically it's tonight, but it's the middle of the night. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, then I'll get to
Yeah.
it.
So, yeah, that's a good question on the dates. When it says due on that day, it's the last
Okay.
second of the day or whatever.
All right, thank you, man. Have a good one.
Don't stay up too late though.
Nah, I'm
I see
asleep early
people turn
tonight.
in stuff at like 3 a.m. I'm like, oh man. Don't do that.
Nah, I'm asleep early tonight. Thank you, though, man. Have a good one.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Bye, Chi.
Wait, when is the assignment 4 due?
I think it's 2 weeks. So that's what I was saying. If you look at
2 weeks from today?
What's that?
Is it 2 weeks from today?
Yes, I think so. So let me
Today that will be.
if
Oh,
you
okay.
go to the calendar. Here's the calendar, right? And then so here's our calendar. So here's assignment 4, right on the 28th. So 2 weeks from today, yeah.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yep. Yeah, you can always check those on the calendar
Alright.
in Canvas.
Okay.
Cool.
Great class. Thank you, Garrett.
All right, see you later.
Bye.